Hi, I'm Jake Kouns, CEO of Risk-Based Security. Welcome to this edition of The Right Security, the show which we spend time talking with leaders and veterans in the security space, tackling the issues of the day. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Cran, or as many may call him, Jake Kouns. Jonathan's the founder, CEO of Intrigue Corporation. There is some big news, but we'll talk about that later. Prior to founding Intrigue, he's held several positions in the security industry, including head of research at Kenna, VP of product at BugCrowd, chief technology officer at Pony Express, and multiple roles at Rapid7 from pen tester, joining the Metasploit project. Jonathan has seemed to be always focused on solving technical problems in a way of creating new solutions for them. I've known Jonathan for a while, and I've enjoyed some really solid debates over the years, and I'm looking forward to some of it today. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jake. Super happy to be here.
All right. So today, I'm really looking forward to diving into attack surface management. But I have a feeling maybe there's probably no way we don't cover some vuln stuff at some point, right? But let us jump in and let's try to set the stage today for the conversation. So attack surface management, it appears to be pretty hot right now. It even has its own acronym now. You might hear ASM, right? I know you get asked this a lot, but can you please start out giving our viewers some definitions? So how about I throw a few sort of terms and things at you, and then you respond. So I'll start off, and we'll just say, what is attack surface management?
Yeah, good question. So it is a hot term right now. I would say it's evolved a little bit over the last few years, especially to become something that's sort of on the tip of the tongue of quite a few security vendors. I would say it's more well understood, or at least well used within the security vendor space than it is within practitioners and the defender side. So it's evolving. And the way I look at it, and the way we've looked at it at Intrigue, is it's pulling together a bunch of disparate, different challenges. Like things like vulnerability management, asset discovery, asset management. I mean, it's a combination, and really when you boil it down, it's about getting visibility of your environment. It's about getting visibility of your exposures, whether from an external perspective, which is what we primarily do at Intrigue, or from a cloud perspective, which is, there's other vendors who are specifically focused on cloud, or from an internal perspective. I mean, it's all about visibility. It's all about knowing what you have. It's all about knowing what those things are running and the configurations of those devices. And then it's all about what is it actually exposed to, or what am I, as my organization, exposed to? So you see aspects of, vulnerability management, asset management, digital threat monitoring, threat intelligence, all those things kind of fusing together. And I think, I think that the reason the time is right for a new space is, you see this migration to the cloud. Lots and lots of things are API available now. There's many, many databases that can be integrated. And really, there's just these gaps that have been left by traditional solutions where, if you're not pointing it at the exact right range, or you're not, plugging in the individual host that you want to scan on a regular basis, you're missing things. And threat actors are taking, getting gain from this because there's just, these gaps in your network that are, exploitable. And so it's all about finding that exploitable stuff before the threat. That's my long-winded answer to that question.
It was interesting to hear you say internal assets as well, because I've seen a lot of definitions here recently that are just saying internet-facing assets, the perimeter, those kinds of things. So it leads me into my next question. What is asset inventory?
Yeah. I mean, we've been around, both of us have been around long enough to have seen this one evolve across a bunch of different technologies. It used to be your CMDB and in this registry that you would create, and typically you would have, an actual IP address assigned to a host, or at least, your scanners would be feeding your asset inventory. But the reality is, everything's ephemeral these days. Any modern system that's getting created is it's there and then it's gone. So these systems have to evolve. Asset inventory is all about finding things that exist, whether they exist for a long-term, many years, they're like a laptop or a mobile device, or whether they're ephemeral and they exist for only a few seconds, or they're a container. And the thing is, you can't really well define an asset in the age of software defined everything. It's a noun, but those sorts of nouns are evolving. What's a lambda or a cloud process these days or a cloud function, is that an asset? Well, certainly you need to know about it if you're sitting in a security spot. So I don't try to be too pedantic about it. I just say, listen, if it's a noun and it's a thing that we should know about as a security team, that's a thing we care about. It should be somewhere in an inventory that we can get access to it and see that it exists.
All right, I'm going to be annoying here, and I'm going to say, all right, I'm following you, but then what is asset discovery, and how's that different from inventory? And I know this is getting down into wording, but I'm seeing a lot of people using these words, and they're not all being used the same. So from your perspective, asset discovery, what is it?
Yeah, what's discovery? So I would argue the discovery is the active process or passive process of discovering things to put into your inventory. We have a bunch of magic at Intrigue to do discovery with sort of an iterative or recursive process. So it's not like discovery is just the simple process of scanning or the simple process of listening on the network anymore. I mean, we like to think about treating discovery as an investigation. It's like when you get a piece of information, can you use that piece of information to find additional unknowns? So I would say discovery is more this holistic process of finding everything that exists, and whether that be with, again, external, cloud, on-prem, doesn't really matter. It's all about finding those things and then getting them into your inventory on a continuous basis, so that when you're able to, or when you need to, really, you can just simply search. And that's, I would also argue that's a piece of attack surface management, is having the ability to search that inventory, especially under a fire drill where you're trying to figure out, are you running a piece of software which is potentially vulnerable, or are you running a configuration which is potentially vulnerable? So you have to have strong discovery to be able to facilitate that, feeding into a continuously updated inventory.
That makes sense. So the last one that I see all the time now is asset mapping. How do you respond when you hear someone talk about asset mapping?
Yeah. So I would argue mapping and discovery are relatively interchangeable. Mapping might, if you see this, we use this term too. If you see it, it might entail that process of recursive discovery. So, one thing worth considering here is, sitting in a security spot, you're not always going to have full visibility of everything that's happening inside the organization. That's okay. You want empowered developers. You want empowered marketing teams. You want these folks to be able to go out and create new things for the organization. However, you also have responsibility for protecting those things in a lot of cases. And most of the time, or at least a lot of the time, the processes aren't so robust that things get registered with security ahead of time. And you're put in the spot of being reactive a little bit and having to go out and discover those things. Well, the reality is it's hard to discover unknowns. And so can you use your knowns to discover your unknowns and make those knowns, and then find more unknowns, and just continue this process of being able to map out the attack surface, or effectively create what we like to think of as a graph of the organization and all the interconnected pieces, and again, pivoting from one piece of information to the next to be able to find everything that's out there as complete as possible. So that's how I think about mapping in relation to discovery. Discovery might be an older term. Mapping, is a relatively new term, I would say, in this space, where it's all about finding everything recursively using known and unknowns interchangeably. All
right, so I have to ask this last final question, because you even mentioned it earlier. CMDB, right? So for me, who came up through the old school IT ranks, right, from ITIL, the IT infrastructure library, we always talked about a CMDB, right, configuration management database. So is this just all a CMDB, and you marketing people have rebranded this to attack surface management, or what's going on?
All I can think is burn it with fire. No, the CMDB is an old term, of course. Legacy, definitely, for sure. It doesn't, to me, come across as something that's continuously updated. It's such a oftentimes a percentage of what you actually own. Listen, every organization is going to have a CMDB of some sort, and it's probably going to be fed by a bunch of different sources. However, it's necessary, not sufficient, I think. And if you look at modern organizations, there is no CMDB, right? Like, this legacy concept. Modern organizations have, Jamf plugged in or some sort of EDR or XDR plugged in so they can actually see all the different devices. And so CMDB to me is not integration oriented. It's more, it's like a database you put things into. It's RSA Archer, it's like this this thing, a database that needs to be fed versus pulling information from all the different places. So I think there's a fundamental flip there. Like no longer should security expect things to be pushed to them so much as they should be pulling information from lots of different places. Of course, that's a give and take, but yeah, that's how I think about that. Burn it.
You might get some emails from the old school ITIL people after this video. So, write to Jonathan. He'll happily debate you. But all right, lots of debates in the security industry always. And asset inventory, let's just use that term instead of all the other ones. That's been highly debated forever, right? And I've been seeing the debate pop up again about, can you even do asset inventory, right? So just a few days ago, I saw this Spider-Man InfoSec meme about assets start cruising around, and it had like the 3 frames, right? Tell me the truth, I'm ready to hear it. And the next frame was, you need an accurate inventory of your assets before you can work on protecting it, and then crying face. So what's your initial reaction to this asset inventory problem's too hard, so we don't even bother with it, and that meme?
Well, the meme's are pretty accurate for today. Let's say that it is a challenging problem. Here's why I am not. Here's why I don't think it's impossible. In a world of cloud-based infrastructure and software-defined everything, everything's an API, and as long as you can get credentials to the right places, generally speaking, you can create a relatively accurate inventory. And we see that, like the forward-thinking organizations are already doing this, right? They're finding the places where their EDR is not deployed, using a multitude of different solutions. But in general, they're plugging all their systems, which would have some amount of inventory information. That's going to be your vulnerability scanners. That's going to be your network scanners. That's going to be your EDR and your cloud systems, AWS, GCP, Azure. All of these things can be plugged together to be able to give you a relatively accurate view of what's out there. Now, there's always that last mile problem, and we work really hard at Intrigue to solve this problem. That's really where our biggest focus is taking knowns, turning them, and finding unknowns from the knowns. But, I actually, in 2021, I think we're on the right track to solve this problem. Even though things are super ephemeral, now it just becomes a problem of understanding how to manage ephemeral data more than it is a problem of being able to get the data.
I find it amusing that so many people still can't agree about asset stuff. And so I did, on that meme post, I read a little bit of the comments, and there were 2 that stuck out to me. One was, we must get away from security, which depends upon full inventory. It was difficult back when things were mostly static. It's practically impossible at 2021 speeds. And then the other one was, even if you could have full inventory, it'd become outdated pretty quickly. So I'm going to hit this one again. Like, what do you say to those people that have kind of given up on asset inventory and say, how could we be expected to know what we have?
Yeah. I mean, the only logical thing to say is, like, you can't manage what you don't know about. And so, if you really boil it down to an information problem, the more visibility and the more information you have about what you own, the easier it becomes to manage. The easier it becomes to get a solution in front of it. So, I'm not one of those who would necessarily say, stick your head in the sand. I would say, go integrate with everything you possibly can. There's more APIs available than there's ever been before. That doesn't mean it's not a challenging problem, but now is the time to see these things start to come together. Like, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot now.
I think personally it's so much easier now than it was. So it feels like some folks are hanging on to this concept of it was so hard that it's still hard, and I think it's getting a bit better. But so at RBS here, we believe in risk scores, right? And we define them more simplistically as asset value times threat likelihood times vulnerability exposure, and that gives us a risk score. So in our view of the world and what we've been saying for a good 10 years, without understanding your assets, it's pretty hard to understand how to prioritize and figure out what to remediate. So I want to, instead of beating on the find the asset stuff more, I think we've done that enough. What are your thoughts on the asset, once you find them, what are those asset attributes that an organization should collect that would then maybe help them understand how to prioritize?
And by the way, just like going back to the previous problem for a second, like that's not to make light of OT problems or, IoT. There are definitely like modern difficult challenges of getting that asset information that harken back to 20 years ago. But I think you're exactly right. I mean, today where we are, it's much easier to gather and query the information. OS queries sort of modernized a bunch of that. I think that's the exact right line of thinking is now that we can get it, what now? And you start with the basics, right? You start with versions, software running on them, and forget about configurations for a second. Like it's a hard enough problem to just get, what is this thing running? What is the software on it? Handling backporting, handling, specific multi versions on a given system. That's where I would start is with what software is it running? How does that software, is it out of date? Is it outdated? Is it out of life, end of life? And then you can start to get into specific configurations. Is this piece of software, is this distributed by the OS and is it backported or is it, custom installed? Things like that. That is probably where I would first start. But there's a more fundamental challenge actually, which is naming of systems. So we deal with this a lot because, what happens if you have an IP address that's like 1111 on your network or 10.10.10.10, and then, another system pops up at 10.10.10.10, but it's running a different set of software. Like, are those the same system? And so having pretty strong ability to define how your naming schemes work. This is a thing that was well defined at Canada too, I think, and I'd be interested to know how you handle the problem. But, that in and of itself, just the naming of a given asset in a world where everything's ephemeral, how do you even manage that? And how do you manage it over time? Like that's a challenging problem right there. So even just the most basic of attributes can be difficult.
Makes sense. So I think one of the things that we've been on sort of rants about is trying to get organizations out there when they say vulnerability management to stop saying, oh yeah, we scan, right? I firmly believe a scanner is part of it, but it's not it, right? And as you know, I think intelligence is the foundation. And then once you have that intelligence, only then can you prioritize and remediate. And when I say intelligence, of course, vulnerability intelligence is huge, but it's also intelligence about your own organizations, those assets. We run into a lot of people right now where they're understanding this, but they're still scanning or pen testing because they believe that's how they get the visibility. That's how they solve that, collect the asset intelligence. So I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, does attack surface management ASM products, does that replace that?
Good question. You can think about what we're doing as continuous pen testing. If you were to put an actor behind a keyboard, put a person behind a keyboard, and say, "Go find all our assets," a lot of what we're doing is what they would do. You start with the knowns. You scan those things. You look and see what are the devices on there. You analyze deeply. Think about an application endpoint and all the links that it points out to, some of which are going to be your own. That's going to find more assets. And so, we messaged early on, I think we were saying intelligent digital footprinting is I think what we had before attack surface management got hot. We were saying intelligent digital footprinting, which was, just our way of saying like, listen, we try to pivot the same way a person would. We treat asset discovery like an investigation. So, in the end, nothing's ever going to replace a person. Like an intelligent, sentient being looking at data is going to have more context than any automation really ever could. I think that's mostly true in the age of ML. And so, nothing should replace red teaming or true pen testing. But I do think it's time to take people away from doing what we would have called, vulnerability assessments or, these sort of like point a scanner at a range and then look at the results and see what's exploitable. we can automate the heck out of that. We've been automating the heck out of it for the last 15 years. And so, yeah, of course, when we find a piece of software which has a known exploit, we'll map that together. We'll try to exploit it if it's, if it's reasonably exploitable. We'll try to do all those things and just point out, hey, there's something that's definitely like a Tomcat instance which can be exploited today, or a Exchange, lots and lots of Exchange stuff out there. Those sorts of things should be fully automated at this point. Like, it's 2021. Come on. Like, you can, for the cost of a person, you can be doing 10x the amount of work in the same, in less time. And it's crazy to think that you would have people doing these sorts of things. Now, we do run into shops that are still doing that, and they are literally begging for more headcount. But once you kind of put an ASM solution in front of them, they're like, oh, I get it. We can use this to triage off a bunch of work and focus our people on the right thing. So what I would say is, yeah, kinda. You're not going to replace people, though.
I think that makes sense, but we're seeing the same sort of thing, that people are starting to realize that legacy vulnerability scanning had its place and it helped us to get here. But there's better ways to go about things moving forward with saving money and better prioritization. So it'll be interesting to see how the ASM stuff plays in, overlaps, complements, because some people still don't want to get rid of their scanners because they've always done it that way, and the regulatory things talk about it. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, you know what I think is going to happen is, and I think it's already happening, I just think it's not evenly distributed yet. You have things like Carbon Black, and because we worked on that at Kenna, and pretty much every EDR solution today is self-reporting in terms of what the OS is. You can just query it, right? You've got all this information there. You can cross-reference that with your vulnerability database, right? Like better vulnerability information than was ever available, because you can get a CPE out, or better than a CPE even. You can cross-reference that and get a pretty good handle on what the vulnerabilities are. So you have these sort of like self, communicating, or what's the word I'm looking for? Essentially they're self-reporting machines. But then you still have that last mile problem, which is kind of what we're focused on, which is, there's going to be stuff where you can't, either you don't know that system, it isn't plugged yet into your self-reporting infrastructure and able to cross-reference with vulnerabilities and report, hey, I'm vulnerable, or it's simply an unknown. It was spun up in a different AWS account, different GCP account, whatever it is, and you've still got to protect that stuff. Like, it's still on your network in some form. There's still credentials there which provide access to sensitive data. There's an open database somewhere because a developer needed it, but forgot to protect it properly, or wasn't able to protect it properly. So I think you see this legacy scanner market moving into kind of self-reporting EDR, systems that are XDR is kind of like taking that now. But then there's this ASM is kind of picking up the slack, I think, in looking broadly across an infrastructure. And we end up talking to security intelligence teams, to red teams, to blue teams, AppSec teams, kind of all of it, because there's still gaps no matter what. No matter how self-reporting a set of infrastructure is, you're still going to have gaps, and you want somebody continuously kind of looking at it to say, hey, even though this thing's patched, you're still misconfiguring this one attribute. And by the way, I can create an SSRF into that system and use that system to pivot to the next one. Things like that. So yeah, I mean, I just see the scanner market splitting into these like self-reporting and then kind of like last mile scanners.
So you covered this a little bit, but I think it's such an important one. I want to talk again about new technology, and how new technology coming out is great for solving problems, but some of the inventory problems that that you're trying to solve and other people are trying, it kind of makes it a little bit more challenging. So can we maybe touch a little bit more again on virtualization, cloud, containers, and how that makes sort of understanding your attack surface a little more challenging? And then if you have any sort of recommendations or thoughts for organizations on things that they could do that could make your job better, that would be awesome to hear.
Yeah. I think it goes without saying, like, lots and lots of software-defined assets exist in any organization today, whether you're the smallest, like just starting, and you're using SaaS services for everything. You got your HubSpot or your Salesforce, and you're spinning up data in there. That's an asset for you. Or you're sort of a legacy organization. You're maybe a Colonial Pipeline to think about it. You've got these kind of like systems that have been there forever. They're on the same network. So, but they're still doing stuff in the cloud, right? Like they're still spinning up, customer facing services. And so you're going to have some amount of ephemerality to machines. You have to sort of decide, how deeply do you want to manage these things? How long do they live? How much drift is there in these devices? So, if you've got a golden image, like a VM or a Docker file or an image of whatever sort, and you're spinning those up and they never modify, well, then most of your challenges are just AppSec challenges. They're can I abuse the application layer stuff? But if they're running, over a period of time and there's any amount of drift, you have a vulnerability management problem. And if you can't refresh them or rehydrate them is a word that gets used as well, you're now in a position where you have to patch. And if you have to patch, you've got to have visibility of them. You've got to know, like when are they spinning up and when are they spinning down? So to answer your question, what makes this whole thing easier? I mean, there's a multitude of solutions out there. We also do this. We plug into AWS accounts, GCP accounts, and we pull data out of them, looking for EC2 instances, looking in the container registries, looking for software-defined assets, and then analyzing those things, looking for vulnerabilities. And so I would say if you're not in the market for one of those today, you should be looking at it. And you should be plugging it into as many AWS accounts as you have. Yeah, I mean, that's how I would approach the problem is, doing the things you've been doing, but also looking for the solutions that can directly integrate into these systems, whether it's VMware, whether it's AWS, whether it's GCP or Azure. All those things should be plugged into. Now, another thing, actually, like one thing that we get a lot of value out is plugging into DNS. So if you plug us into your DNS systems, we can actually use that to pivot and pull all the information associated with what's on your network. If you have www.company.com, we'll pull that, we'll resolve it, we'll go look at that system. But more commonly, what you'll have is, long random string of 16 characters .company.com, because that's an ephemeral asset, and that's a good way to go find those unknowns, is plug into DNS. So that's the thing. I think we're pretty unique in that. I'm not sure if everybody's doing that yet. But it is a good way of, kind of identifying that last mile of ephemeral things.
So I love that we've been sort of talking about assets and trying to define what they are. And then when you layer in sort of the DevSecOps stuff and you talk about SBOM, bill of materials and things like that, I find it kind of funny, that debate as well, because a lot of times I'll see people that they love SBOM and they think it's amazing and everyone needs to know everything that's in your app, but then they'll say, but it's impossible to get full asset inventory, which makes the debate really funny. You should know everything in your app, but to know everything in your environment is completely different. How do you, and then how does the whole attack surface management consider that SBOM problem? Do they, or is it, no, we only look at the fully delivered asset?
Yeah, I think what you'll see is evolution. And by the way, I think that even already attack surface management is splitting into different sort of factions. And so you see, the traditional AppSec faction, and you see the CloudSec faction, and you see sort of us, the external EASM, I think is what it's getting dubbed. But it's all kind of different views of the same thing. I consider this mostly an AppSec problem. And I look at the SCA solutions that exist, the Black Ducks, the white sources, these sorts of things, Sneak, of course. And so they are probably in the best position because they can plug direct. And who's actually in the best position to figure this out is the repository platform. So the GitHubs, the GitLabs. If you push your code in there, they're in the position of having access to that all the time. And I look at, just GitHub's dependency bot. We use the heck out of this thing. It's great because it just tells us when there's something in one of our components that needs an update, and oftentimes it'll actually allow you to make that update itself. So this is like the grand vision of automated remediation, and all it takes for us to get there is to define it as code. You can't really have automated remediation without having definition as code. That's a thing I think a lot of folks forget. It's just too dangerous to patch a running system. Patch a dynamic environment. Like in IT would hate that. And so the way you deal with that is you have everything defined as code, and then you can automatically suggest a patch, which is what dependency bot does. And I look at that as sort of the future of vulnerability remediation in the AppSec space, and really everything's becoming AppSec. So, we look at that, but we tend to think of that as an AppSec problem today. It's not something we're directly dealing with today, though we are pushing a GitHub integration. We're currently focused on finding secrets in GitHub and GitLab repositories. It's an interesting idea to use that for inventory as well. I kind of like that idea. Noted. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if only they had the best vuln intelligence, it would be a home run, right? As all these things come together. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if the ASM platforms will look at it that way as well. If you're really saying the whole attack surface management, and you're just giving me, oh, you're running this thing, but we don't figure out what's in it, then maybe I'm not seeing everything. All right, look, we're going to go into Intrigue. I want to talk Intrigue with you, okay? And then you can tell me other stuff you want to tell me too. But you were an open source project. You had your first commit in July 5th, 2015 is what I think I discovered when I was researching. But then Intrigue as a company was founded in 2019.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the journey? And then I think it's probably time you can drop your big news for us.
Yeah. Thanks for that. By the way, the setup's awesome. And so 2015 was the current iteration of Core. There were several iterations before. One called Taper. The API for reconnaissance was the original idea. We had a great Taper logo and everything. It was really great. Stephen Hilt had made us a logo, shaped like in the form of a taper. That one lasted a couple of years. I was learning Rails at the time, and so ultimately we decided, okay, we need to rewrite. And so the 2015 rewrite was, I think, the third time we tried to rewrite it. And by the way, the original genesis of this was a lot of conversations around PTES. If you remember the pen test execution standard put together by Ian Amid and Chris Nickerson, Chris Gates, a whole bunch of guys. And I was thinking, like, what can I do to automate a lot of this stuff? And I ultimately converged on recon as like one of the hardest challenges. It was clearly a big data problem. And so it was, and at the same time, I was also pen testing myself, and I wanted to automate as much as I could, thinking, like, how could we make pen testing more like Maltego? Could we make it visual? Could we make it so that pivoting is really, ultimately pivoting is the concept of pen testing. How do I get from point A to point B? Pivoting a bunch of times. Anyway, so take what is it now, 7 years of open source development, largely with a small team. Whenever a committer would show up, we'd sort of like insta recruit them, bring them into the team, start to pay them. And so we had a small team of contractors that were also working on the open source side. And we had, I think we have like something like 50,000 downloads on the open source side now. But to your point, in 2019, I actually formed the company, but I didn't really start working on it as a company until about 2020, right around the RSA timeframe. I decided, okay, the market's clearly hot. It's time to accelerate. I was being told pretty extensively by everybody that I talked to that I needed to accelerate because there were lots of folks who were working on this problem. And so we raised some money in 2020. We started to build up a team. We're about 10 people now. And it rebuilt the entire UI. We had this like sort of horrendous, traditional HTML, awful, hard to use thing that was actually very powerful underneath. But like, if you were to look at it, you go like, I don't know if I want to touch that. That just looks terrible. I found an amazing designer, a great group of engineers. And we rebuilt, put the new platform together, launched it in April, I want to say, like early April. And then we had some execution. We got some really great customers, large enterprise and government, a lot of government interest. And effectively 3 months ago, I would say, we got some interest to acquire the company. And over the course of the last 3 months, we've been working on this process. And just last week, we announced we've been acquired by Mandiant, FireEye Mandiant. And so that was literally the fastest. I think if you consider 2020 as the actual starting point of the company, I think it was 8 months of execution, basically, which is exciting. It's a little crazy as a seed stage company to be pulled into a public company like this, especially one that's of course FireEye and Mandiant are. Mandiant is becoming the company and divesting FireEye. But that's part of what made it exciting, to be honest, is I can't think of another opportunity where you've got this like incredible intelligence company who's automating a lot of what they're doing, or at least like feeding their intelligence into this platform called Mandiant Advantage. And we're sort of pulled in to take the attack surface management component of that and build upon it and sort of expand the market in a big way. It's such a bigger platform than what we had access to as a startup company. And so, we were having these conversations with the largest of the large organizations, but as a 10-person startup company, they kind of look at you and they go, yeah, but we like what you're doing, but we're not going to give you any data. And so this sort of changes that whole equation to where now we're the large company. We have a security team that's looking at our stuff. We've already been red teamed, everything. Been through a bunch of different security processes over the last couple of weeks. But that transition into this larger platform, into this larger company, especially on the verge of repositioning the company as a fast-growing SaaS company, was really exciting. And it's definitely a strategic decision on the part of the company. You just don't get many opportunities to do something like this, and you don't get to choose your buyer; they choose you. And so this was definitely the right time for us to accelerate in a big way. We're going to double the size of the team, get a ton more resources, and just go. Like we want to really define what's going on in attack surface management.
I'm really happy for you, proud of you, and you should be proud of yourself. And as someone that's 10 years now, that was pretty fast, brother. Wow.
Yeah, nobody gets to see the grueling nights and weekends on the open source side. My wife, she was very thrilled about the idea of potentially we could exit, and me too. The reality is this is a good thing for the team. It's a good thing for the investors. Like everybody's good exit.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy for you. All right. So a couple of weeks ago, you tweeted at me. And by the way, I've been trying to stay off Twitter because it makes me cranky a lot. But and I think you were just poking me because you knew we were going to talk. I think you were just messing with me. But so what you tweeted, and I'm going to put links in the show notes and everything. You tweeted at me. You said, data science driving vulnerability intelligence forward in a big way. Can't stress enough that we need better data analysis. And then I think you saw my reply, which was shock face. And that reply was about CVE continuing to miss important vulnerabilities and exploits being available. So I know I love it. And I think you finally have come around to it. But I love that picture from the InfoSec World panel that Mark Arnold put together for us, where we're debating CVE and just how bad things were. So have you come around on the CVE, or do we need to debate this some more? Where are you with CVE now?
All I'll say is I was right. I continue to be right, Jake. There was never a question about that. I really do think CVE is scaling. Of course, there's always more to do, and I think you do an amazing job of kind of closing that gap that CVE isn't able to take on. It's always interesting to see your, like, more than anybody else, the vulnerability intelligence reports that you put out, just the numbers around those. And I think I didn't realize until a few years ago just how much automation you had in discovering these, and how you were using sort of bug trackers and all sorts of things to identify these vulnerabilities ahead of everybody else. And ultimately, you've got this fantastic set of data, which I'll just say this, like, with the split in this vulnerability intelligence assessment management market, you've got the EDR solutions and you've got the attack surface management solutions. You're well positioned to get that intelligence in front of people, because now people are more inclined to match on CPE and match on, on the actual vulnerability, the software. So I was right.
No. Since you're the guest and I should be nice to you, I won't argue too much. But yeah, CVE is still struggling. We reference them because people like it, but it's really eye-opening with how they're trying to federate the work out, that the quality now and the timeliness has gotten way worse. So we're seeing some numbers go up, but artificially makes it feel better, but the actual actionable to have that metadata intelligence to overlap with what ASM can do is really not there. So, but anyways, all right. So look, see, I kept that pretty light. I didn't give you too much grief on CVE and Vol stuff. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So for companies that are struggling with too much work, too many assets, too many vulnerabilities, what do you say to them to how to get started with maybe an attack surface management program? Combination of things. I think what we're talking about is prioritization as a
problem. We do a lot of the things that are required for prioritization, which is cross-referencing discovered issues with active threat. Which, by the way, just coming back to the previous mention of the GitHub repository that I tweeted, I actually think the Scientia guys they put together this analysis of, like, here's the problem. There's not enough structured intelligence to be able to prioritize well. And we're now in a position where if we can use ML and we can use classifiers to determine whether something is actively exploited or not, meaning there is an exploit on GitHub or not, you don't see GitHub labeling things with a CVE. It might be in the name of the repository. The user might actually put it out there in the README. But in the end, it's difficult to tell if this is actually a vulnerability that I should care about. And again, it's not just CVE. It is this thing useful? Is this a piece of code which can be used to exploit a piece of software in a particular configuration? So finding those things quickly, automatically, and then cross-referencing it across your entire inventory, that's a difficult challenge. Now, we do a lot of that. We do it primarily based on CVE today, though we will find misconfigurations, things like that. But one thing I'm doing, Jake, we're finding the technology, we're grabbing versions whenever we can, because we too believe that it's important to be able to know exactly what software you're running and to be able to cross-reference that with the best vulnerability data. And so, long story short, automate everything, get an attack surface management solution, especially on the external side to start with, would be my suggestion. It's self-serving, but I'll just say it. It's simple to plug in. You don't actually have to have any integrations to get value out of it. Our trials end up being just pointing it at a company, which we got this catalog of 100,000 companies already pre-gathered, and we got some pretty interesting stuff. And you can effectively get a stream of intelligence about what's out there, what an attacker can see. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You want to plug it into your cloud accounts. You want to plug it into your GitHub. You want to plug it into pretty much everything you have so that you can get a more complete inventory, a picture. And then we will do the work to automatically cross-reference. We'll cross-reference with CVSS, CVE when it's available. We have a threat severity rating, and we're working on getting EPSS, which is the work that kind of came out of Jay Jacobs, the Scientia folks, the Kenna folks, and Jake. We should really talk about EPSS because it's cool. It's coming. It is a way to get a rating, and admittedly, it's stuck on CVE today, or it's limited to CVE, but at least we can use it to determine whether something should be fixed right away or not, and that is an important piece of prioritization. So my long-winded answer: automate, buy Intrigue, cross-reference with vulnerabilities.
I love it. No, and the EPSS stuff, there's a few things in there I would have switched, but I do like that we're trying to predict those exploits, because again, we're trying to, we need to tell customers and an organization about every vuln that's out there, and then give them that metadata to pick the ones that apply to them. We don't want a limited scope and say, don't worry about it. So I agree with you. There's some great stuff happening there. Now, I will say, for me, I'm a big fan of inventory, but the area that I feel like still isn't there yet, and it's not just SBOM with trying to figure out how to name sort of, I'll say, dependencies, but even like with packages on Linux boxes and all this sort of stuff. And now you have package managers, and there's so many of them. I feel like you need a package manager or a package manager, and it's like, it is really hard sometimes when a vuln comes out to be able to figure out how to communicate to all these systems when we're not communicating inventory in a common fashion. And I'm not seeing anything yet that's going to solve it holistically. I see some point solutions for SBOM. I see some individual sort of groups. I see some vendors getting behind things, and this is the way we're doing it, and you can do it or not. So that to me is the area where I think we need to see some movement. Do you have any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. We had so I assume you're talking about CPE being insufficient to be able to correctly identify the thing that actually exists. Yeah, I mean 100%. This is the difficult problem, and I agree with you. Like, I would happily put effort and time and work into helping figure this out. The problem, of course, with standards is you create one more every time you create a standard. But what we've done is we've adopted CPE. We've modified it to create things like services. So when we detect, hey, you've got a connection here to HubSpot, we'll actually go like CPE S being the determiner for HubSpot, and then HubSpot's the vendor, HubSpot's the product, that sort of thing. Now, of course, you're not necessarily going to care about vulnerabilities, but you might care about a breach. That's a useful thing to be able to correlate those two things. But listen, I agree with you. It's not specific enough. You've seen the SCA vendors, the Sneaks, the Sonatypes, et cetera. Create or adopt or modify CPE or create their own. I don't know that there is one standard. There was some talk on the MITRE CPE list a while back about a different standard, but I don't recall what it was, and it seemed to have lost steam. Are you aware of anything that exists or anything that's like gaining steam?
Not right now. The big focus seems to be all on the SBOM stuff that Alan and the team are doing, and they've made great progress there. Yeah. But it's it's kind of focused on that area, not the larger one. All right, man. So hey, let's wrap it up here. Let's wrap it up. And for all the ASM haters out there, for all the people that say asset inventory is too hard, just do security. Stop complaining about inventory. In closing, what do you concisely say to them?
Just come check it out. I mean, like that is the only thing I can say is we will. And if you don't want to use the hosted version, use the open source version. Check it out; it'll work. You will get value out of it. I promise. This is not an unsolvable problem. We are going to solve the problem.
Well, I can tell you, I think I only saw the version with the bad UI, which it was rough. I think that was my feedback to you. But all the data that you had and what you were able to do was fabulous, and I'm looking forward to great things to come. So, Jonathan Cran, founder of CEO Intrigue. I'm sure some new title or something to come soon. Congrats on all your success. It's great to see what you've done with the company, what you've done with your open source core. Really appreciate your time today, and pleasure debating as always, and I look forward to more.
As always. Awesome. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of The Right Security. As always, we'll have more details and links in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, all that sort of stuff. And you can learn more about RBS at our website. Thank you for tuning in.